So welcome, my name is Laurel Cuff. I'm from the sustainability team at UTAS, but obviously this was put out to everyone. So if you're from the UTAS community or not, welcome. And wherever you're sitting in Tassie right now, you'll be on Aboriginal land. I'm coming to you from Nipaluna, Hobart, or Taroona to be exact. And this is the traditional land of the Melanina people who, as you probably know, are no longer here as a direct result of white invasion, European invasion. So I acknowledge with great respect the Palawa people's ongoing efforts to reconnect with their land and their food and culture and language and customs and air and sea country across the more than 300 islands that make up Lutruwita, Tasmania. And I offer my deep respect to elders, past and present. As a white Australian myself with European heritage, I feel really very grateful to live on this archipelago, I guess. It's not really an island. And I stand for a future that genuinely privileges and respects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge and perspectives. So the topic that we're talking about today has deep, I suppose, deep roots in this disconnect that has happened, particularly in white Western cultures from nature, that understanding that humankind is part of nature tends to form the foundation, as we know, of Indigenous cultures all over the world. But I think we need to really reconcile with that and re-engage with that understanding, particularly when it comes to trying to deal with the issues that we're going to talk about. So let's have a little look, see if I can change my slide. I feel that this really begins with a process of reconnecting with our places as a part of nature, including First Nations ways of knowing and being and doing, and with our own power to make choices that are meaningful and lasting, and to do practical stuff. We can use our hands. We can gain or reignite skills that give us greater control over the way we live in the world. And I think what we need is a revolution. You might think that revolution is a bit of a dramatic word to use. I think absolutely not. It's the perfect word when we think about revolutions happening because people rise up to overthrow one system and try and replace it with a new one. That's precisely what we need to happen in our relationship with material things and the way we think about things. Whether, why, and how we acquire things, how we use them, how we look after them, reuse them, upcycle them, refurbish them, and what might happen to them when their usefulness to us is all used up. So I suppose what I really hope you get out of today's little workshop is that even though you might be doing some of these things, mending and altering and repairing clothes, or accessories or shoes or whatever it is, and you might despair because you're not seeing people around you doing it, it's still worth doing. I can't stress that enough. It's absolutely worth doing. It's really vital. It's a big part of this change that we need to make in how we think about and use things. And you never know how powerful it is when someone else sees good action like this. So here is one of the reasons why it's so important. Let's have a little look back at consumption. Every now and then we have to have an uncomfortable look at how we're consuming things, materials and energy on this planet. There are so many measures out there and estimates about global consumption, but here's just a couple of things that you can have a think about. Around the start of this millennium, consumption surpassed population as the planet's greatest environmental challenge. That was according to a UN panel on international resources. In other words, when we talk about climate change and species extinction, deforestation, water depletion, toxic pollution and other ecological crises. How much each person consumes is now, it matters more than how many of us there are. And to give you a little stat on the disparity about that consumption, the average person in a wealthy country consumes about 13 times what an average person in a poor country does. The example that's given by J.B. McKinnon, and I'll give you his book reference later, it's a great book. His example is, in terms of consumption, having 2 children in Canada is the equivalent of having 26 children in Bangladesh. That's one heck of a statistic. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in what we, living comfortably in a very wealthy nation, can do right now, because clearly the onus is on us to dramatically change the way we think and behave. You might have also heard of Earth Overshoot Day, which was developed in the 70s, or in 1970, I think, by the Footprint Network and the New Economics Foundation. It's a measure of how long it takes us humans to use up the world's regenerative capacity each year. So taking into account material and energy consumption and the planet's bioproductivity, the functioning, successful sort of functioning of our ecosystems, and estimates made each year of when we overstep what is natural and, I guess, absorbable by our planet. In 1970, that day was the 23rd of December. In 2023, it was the 2nd of August. So, in other words, we are using, depleting, and degrading the equivalent of 1 3/4 Earths every year. So that's one measure by which we can track our transition. We need to get back to what they call one planet living. And it doesn't seem like that should be a hard thing to do, but obviously we've got a really, really long way to go to get back to one planet living. Some people argue that 2050 should be our goal for getting back to one planet living. So that's consumption overall. Let's talk about clothes. Why focus on clothes? Well, as far as consumption goes, clothes are one of the biggest problems we have worldwide. Our consumption is so out of control that the fashion industry carries a bigger carbon footprint than aviation and shipping combined. It's somewhere around 10% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Clothes are also responsible for about 20% of global wastewater each year. I bet that some of you have seen that statistic that it takes up to 10,000 litres of water to make one pair of jeans. It's really hard to comprehend, but that talks about growing the cotton right through to delivering that product to the shop. 10,000 litres is the average person's drinking water for 10 years. And that's one pair of jeans. So that should frighten all of us a bit, I think. And Australians are the second highest consumers of textile products in the world per capita after the USA. You can probably guess which is number one. So the average Aussie buys about 27 kilos of clothing per year and puts 23 kilos into landfill per year. That stat comes from an SBS article that I'll share the reference for later. But I think the War on Waste, the recent series talked about those statistics as well. The Guardian had an interesting article too that said that these days 60 to 70% of our clothing is made of plastic, fabrics like polyester, nylon, and elastane. And even those, and this is a really, really burgeoning market, even those items that are made from recycled plastic bottles are not really helping because they disrupt this closed loop system where plastic bottles can be recycled and made back into that high value product, the bottle, another bottle. And and it creates a linear system where you take plastic bottles, you make them into clothing that is, the fabrics are blended and become just impossible, almost impossible, to separate out again and recycle, let alone make back into clothing and close the loop. So there's some of the environmental impacts, but of course there are unbelievable and unacceptable social impacts to the fashion industry as well. There's one event that gets explored in almost all of the resources that I'll share with you later. And I'm sure that you'll probably remember from the news, and that's the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013. This was where an 8-story garment factory in just outside Dhaka in Bangladesh collapsed. The workers had noticed cracks in the walls, but their warnings were ignored, and the building's owner had threatened to withhold pay from anyone who refused to go back to work. As a result, 2,500 people were injured, 1,134 were killed. And workers were making clothing for some of the world's biggest brands in that complex. And a lot of those companies had no idea whether or not their clothes were being sewn by those workers. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Across the fashion industry, workers are often paid as little as 1/5 of what is sort of benchmarked as a living wage in their country. That's so frequent that it's basically the norm. Not that particular level, but underpay is absolutely the norm. It's common practice for them to work in unventilated areas and unsafe buildings, breathe in fibre dust, fires, accidents, injuries, and disease. They're all extremely frequent in textile production facilities. And so, as I said, the leadership were scrambling, the leadership of big clothing brands, that is, were scrambling in the days after that Rana Plaza disaster to find out whether their brands were associated with this factory. And even today, it's a huge problem. Not just the transparency, but the brands actually knowing. So the fashion industry is just so splintered and so subcontracted that it can be impossible to know all the different links in the supply chain. The horror of Rana Plaza should probably have been even more of a watershed moment in the industry, but it did sort of trigger a fair bit of change, including things like Fashion Revolution. So if you go to fashionrevolution.org, if you haven't already heard about this, I'd really encourage you to. They've just put out their 2023 Fashion Transparency Index. And it's still pretty awful. One thing they report is that 1% of the world's 250 major brands, fashion brands, actually report how many of their workers are paid a living wage. That begs the question, how many of them actually know who their workers are? Or are there too many links, too many subcontracted parts of the chain? And so they just don't have real identification, real oversight of who's working for them. 6% of those brands report what type of fuel is used in their manufacturing of clothing. Overall, they gave those 250 brands a score of 26% out of 100% for a whole heap of indicators. They had supply chain transparency, waste and overproduction, tax and purchasing practices, deforestation, water and chemical use, things like freedom of their workers to join unions. 26% was what they got overall. And I think it was around 70 of those brands scored less than 10%. So these are very well-known clothing manufacturers that are making big bucks. So that's a good way. That's one channel through which you can find out how ethical those clothing brands are. But let's start looking at the other side of the coin, and that is the clothes that we already have and how to make them last and even make them dazzle. Please excuse all these tiny little URLs. I know that's really annoying, but I just wanted to make sure that I was crediting every little photo because I've nicked these from the internet. All of these little bits of inspiration come from Pinterest. And I share this in a very eye-exploding kind of way just to show you that there's so much stuff out there. This is just a few little examples of mending, altering, and upcycling. On the left, this is kind of a good reminder that one garment can be made into more than one new thing. Look at these little mittens that you can make out of the sleeve of a jumper. You can make different types of beanies and things, different scarves. I've seen a lot of examples of slippers made out of jeans, jumpers, scarves, things that are, well, not always really cushy, but could be nice and cushy and comfortable. No words for this guy. He's just amazing. But actually, one thing I do like about this example in the middle is that he's patchwork without looking patchwork. And I think one of those things that stops a lot of people getting into upcycling in particular is that they don't want to be patchwork. They don't like the patchwork look. If you're into it, then absolutely the world is your oyster. These fabric shoelaces I've never tried, but if you can come up with a great way of doing the ends so that they stay really solid, I'm totally in, because I think that's a fabulous idea. Top right corner is obviously visible knit mending, and you've probably seen visible mending is quite a movement these days, and that's just a little iron-on patch. A million things can be done with an iron-on patch. They're so easy and so useful. And here is the world of patchwork. These shorts are made out of towels, which is a great idea. You can sort of imagine making a dressing gown or something like that out of towels, but you can make tons of things out of towels. And down in the bottom right corner, these little purses are made out of blankets. And if you've got ideas or thoughts or things to share, please keep them in your mind, because I'll be asking you later if anyone else has come across some great inspiration for things that you can make, alter, or mend or upcycle. So let's start by taking a little look at mending. In other words, fixing something that has a problem in a way that's invisible or very visible. If you've got a sort of corporate blazer or something that you don't want to slap a massive orange patch on, totally understandable. You can get very good at mending that is invisible. There is so much, there are so many resources out there that can give you ideas on that. But my main message here is that there are a lot more things that can be mended with fewer crafty skills than you might think. And you might even have more skills than you realise. One thing that is so useful is darning socks. I've got a darning mushroom. I don't know if you can, I won't stop sharing because it might take me ages to get it back up again. But if you can see me on camera as well, I've got a darning mushroom here. I was talking to a colleague about this the other day, and she doesn't have a darning mushroom. She uses an orange. The purpose is to keep it round while you're threading through to fix the hole in your sock. The three examples on the left here, this obviously a t-shirt got a hole and someone just got very Paisley inspired and creative with that. It's pretty obvious. This is kind of, this is a very useful skill. Someone's obviously a very good knitter with this jumper, and they've gone a bit visible mending and I think this is great because it's very common for your cuffs to get holes, especially in my household. On the right, I've put these two pictures in. These are my Uggies and a pair of my son's Uggies. You just, I wouldn't have thought that I could fix holes in Uggies, but these might get another 3 winters now because we just took the initiative to try and patch them up. Let's see here. Altering. So obviously by that, I just mean modifying an item so that it suits you better. You might just be jazzing it up in some way. These two pictures on the right are simple alterations that I've done at home with a sewing machine. If you don't have a sewing machine, I'd really encourage you to look for tutorial videos that have something like no sew alterations, because there's tons of stuff that you actually can do with a needle and thread or without sewing at all. For example, cutting jeans into shorts or making tank tops out of t-shirts, and just using hemming tape, you know, the iron-on hemming tape to do up the hems of pants or shorts or skirts or dresses. There's a ton of stuff you can do. But if you get access to a sewing machine and have the bravery to try and use it and learn how to use it, the things you can do increase 1,000-fold. I personally believe everything needs pockets. So that's the most common alteration I do. I've got about 10 things that I've put pockets in. And there's a whole branch of opinion out there that says sewing pockets into women's clothing is a feminist act. I'm sure that I'm not the only woman who's bought a dress only to find it pocketless, which is just ridiculous. If you want to put a design or a logo or something on a piece of clothing, you can, of course, go out and get the screen printing equipment, do it yourself, or we have companies that do screen printing with your design in Tassie. But we also have companies that can make you embroidered patches, really high quality ones with your design here in Tassie. So you don't have to go and get new branded things made. When your company decides to renew its branding, nightmare. You're left with boxes and boxes of these garments that you can't use. Let's see here. There are so many videos out there that will tell you how to add or subtract the size or length of your clothing. It's such a handy thing to learn how to do. In fact, I can even attest that underpants that have shrunk to an uncomfortable size in the wash can be made bigger with stretchy fabric. Just make sure you're on stretch stitch. This little baby suit was altered by the folks at the Redress Hub in Lonnie, which is absolutely fabulous if you're ever up there. So there are a few ideas around alterations. And then we have upcycling. And when I say that, I'm talking about making something different from one or more items that used to have another use. A bag out of old t-shirts, a beanie out of a knitted jumper. I'm going to go on just for a moment about boomerang bags. I'm sure some of you will have heard of the boomerang bags movement that started here in Australia. If you go to boomerangbags.org, you'll find that you can find your local boomerang bags community. I started the one in Glenorchy a couple of years ago, or you can just get the pattern and you can make bags out of tablecloths, tea towels, sheets, old t-shirts, all sorts of stuff. We had a lady out in Glenorchy make some out of her husband's old high-vis polo shirts, and she just really helpfully placed the pocket inside the bag, so it was a perfect phone pocket. So you can get really creative just with this really simple pattern. So that's a total gateway project for using a sewing machine. So here on the right, this is my blank coat. My cousin had this made. It's a coat made out of my grandma's old blankets. So these are ones that we used to sleep under as kids. And yes, it's still really itchy, but I love it. And this, it must have taken off this idea of making blank coats, because this one, this yellow one, is also from the Redress Hub in Lonnie, which is very cool. I love the colours of that one. Hankies, I make a lot of hankies out of scrap cotton at home because I have 2 primary school children. Although hankies aren't quite so okay after COVID, are they? But still, children are snotty. Bath mats out of old towels. Oh, down the bottom right, these are Christmas decorations. Obviously, there are so many different decorations you can make, and Christmas must be the most polluting time of the year in those places where we celebrate it. And finally, I like this idea of this top at the bottom, which is top at the bottom, also from the Redress Hub. This is a crocheted granny square blanket with cotton sleeves. I just love that they've got to be creative and put totally different materials together. It's very funky. So one place you can start is with the ultimate test. This is what I'm doing. It might seem gimmicky to sign up for things like Plastic Free July or Secondhand September or whatever, but I think sometimes it can be quite reflective and give you quite a wake-up call. I've just decided to try out Buy Nothing New Month this month, and I think it could be a really interesting experiment. It might sound like a month is not long at all, but if you think about those 27 kilos a year, that means a lot of Australians would have a huge struggle not buying anything new for 1 month. So this is my my little challenge. And then the next step is to get stuck in. I'm not good at sewing. I love it, and I'm very passionate about reuse and things like that. But I was taught by lots of the female members of my family. And now when I need to do something specific, inspiration, I go to Pinterest. Tutorials, I go to YouTube. As you know, there's just everything you could think of. And as I said, what I'm really hoping you think about after this workshop finishes today is the huge range of things that you really can do. You might think, well, this is fast fashion, this top. It cost me $5. Why would I fix it? Because you can fix it, and it's really, really worthwhile learning these skills. Yeah, like I said before, you never know how much momentum might come from your actions. So YouTube, there's so many things you might not think of, like how to stop a jumper from pilling, how to fix the holy armpits in a t-shirt, cover up stains, repair shoes, darn socks, mend holy leggings, all sorts of things. And if you're thinking about buying something or about chucking something in the bin, you can take that as your trigger. That's what I'm working on at the moment. As soon as I go, oh, you know, that child needs some more socks, that's the trigger. Okay, yes, I remember I can darn the socks now, you know. I can even make them bigger if I want. And that's when you get researching, when you know that you might be able to rescue something. I've put boomerang bags there because that's your gateway project for using a sewing machine in particular, for mending, altering, or upcycling. You might have seen Modern Mending Club. That's a Facebook page that my colleague in the Susty team put me onto. I don't think it's Aussie. I think it's American. Well, actually, I suppose you wouldn't know who started it. It's just that most of the people who post on there, I think, are from the States. But there are hundreds of examples and questions and creative ideas. and lots of people having a crack at mending. It's not always with perfect results, but it's a process. To get together with people, which is lovely, wonderful community building thing to do. I only found out about the Redress Hub last week, but they do such wonderful workshops, and they've got a Facebook page as well that you can look at. And they've got a sort of upcycled fashion competition and fashion parade type situation coming up soon too. In Hobart, Frangipani Fabrics, that's just a beautiful fabric shop, okay, but they have nice classes as well. The difference is that they're mostly about using new fabric, and they do have a cost to their classes, but I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't take a project in. I think every Monday they have a sew anything class, so you could quite literally just go in, use one of their machines or bring your own machine and just work on whatever. You can bring in fabrics from home that you want to use for a new project or whatever. Repair cafes, I've just said search for your local one because they change. So it's just the sort of thing that you've got to tap into and find out when and where they're happening. But also see what your local council and neighbourhood houses have got on. Kingborough Council recently had their annual salvaged art exhibition, and they had a wearable salvaged art workshop as part of that. So before I go to the next slide, has anyone got any other ideas? Places where you can get classes, really good resources. Has anyone come across anything quite useful? No, just pipe up anytime you like. I'll go to my next slide. I've got some good resources here. If I can change it. These are things you can read and things you can watch that are not sort of about the process of upcycling or sustainable fashion, but more about the problem itself and what we might be able to do. I'd really recommend Fashionopolis. That was just really comprehensive and fairly recent. No Logo, I read 20 years ago, but I can't recommend it, or Naomi Klein for that matter, enough. Even though that was written before fast fashion really existed, it's just a really detailed look at what brands were doing, even in the 80s and 90s, that was just polluting and exploiting and really, really unethical. So that was a really interesting one. I gave a couple of quotes from J.B. McKinnon earlier, and his book is The Day the World Stops Shopping. I haven't even finished reading this, but because I'm loving it so much, I thought I'd share it with you. Who Made My Clothes? That's an Oxfam campaign as well as an ebook, which has got really good facts in it. And there are heaps of enlightening things you can watch about this as well. I bet a lot of you saw The War on Waste, but Unstitched is also really good. I found it on YouTube. I think there are a few places you can watch it though. This recent Four Corners episode on fast fashion was crazy and fascinating. And also The True Cost on YouTube was particularly focused on the social impacts of the fashion industry. And here are the sources for a lot of those stats that I referred to. And I particularly encourage you to look at Fashion Revolution. So Does anyone have anything to share? Has anyone already been doing any mending, altering, or upcycling?
I try and do mending, but you have inspired me more to think a bit broader than probably what I've been doing. Yes, that's been great. Thank you so much. And I noticed that Kristen has shared a website in the chat for sewing templates and tutorials, which looks really useful.
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you, Kristen. More generally for zero waste sewing templates tutorials. Okay, that's excellent. And Mel, have you had success mending anything in particular? What sort of items do you usually?
Oh yes, so trousers. The men in my household seem to tear their trousers, and you know, I just don't want to throw them out, so I've been patching them. Yeah, but I think I'll start darning socks too, because socks, it's so wasteful, you know.
It's so wasteful, yeah.
And just for a small hole, which can be easily darned. Yeah. So could I? Yeah, you go, Laurel.
I was just going to say, I find socks really frustrating because sometimes they're actually quite pretty. I've got ones that have got really nice designs, but I don't know what to do with it. If I don't darn the hole, then it's gone, you know, because I can't think of other creative things to do with them.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything to share in the chat or by unmuting themselves? No. Awesome. Well, thank you, folks. That's all for today. But if you have any other ideas or questions or feedback, resources or success stories, I'd really love to hear them. Just get in touch at sustainability.utas@utas.edu.au. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Laurel. See you all. Bye.
Cheers.